Welcome to our final lesson in this chapter, where I'm going to show you how to automate the entire deployment process using GitHub Actions. We already have some continuous integration pipelines that we set up at the start of the course, and I'm going to extend them to deploy our client application and our API into Azure. Let's start with the client application because it's going to be easier than the API deployment. And when we were deploying the client application, we used the static web app CLI tool. Now we had to get by with manually updating the API base URL environment variable, and I'm going to revert this change because I'm going to set this value from my CI pipeline. Now let's go into the workflow that's responsible for deploying our client application. This is the GitHub Actions workflow file, which is inside of the workflows folder, and this one is targeting our client application. Now because it's also going to be doing deployment, I'm going to go ahead and rename the workflow file to say build and deploy client. Let's leave the name as client CI, and then I'll update the job to say build and deploy. Now what do I have inside of this workflow? We're doing a checkout of our code, setting up Node.js, and then installing our dependencies using npm CI before building the project using npm run build. During the build process is when we should provide any environment variables, and I'm going to add one here, which is going to represent the Vite API base URL environment variable, and I'm going to pull this value from the application secrets. I'll show you how to set this up in just a moment. After we have built the project, we can go ahead and deploy it, and there's no reason not to use the static web app CLI tool. So I'm going to install it inside of my CI pipeline as a global tool. And finally, I can define my deployment step by saying SWA deploy, specify the target environment to production, and then I can provide my deployment token using GitHub secrets. I'll use this name for the deployment token. And now all I need to do is to provide the values for the secrets inside of my GitHub action. So if I jump into my repository and go to the settings tab, and then I navigate to secrets and variables and choose actions, I'll be able to define the repository secrets that I can reference inside of my GitHub Actions. So I'm going to create a new repository secret, and let's first create a secret for the API base URL. We can get this value from the Azure portal, and we already used it in our previous lesson. So I'm going to copy this value to the clipboard, and here I'm going to say HTTPS and paste in the value that's pointing to the address where our API is deployed. So now I can add this secret, and it's going to be available inside of my GitHub Actions. Now let me add another repository secret. This one will be for my Azure Static Web Apps API token, and you can get this value from the Azure portal if you navigate to your static web app and click Manage Deployment Token. I'm going to copy this value and paste it in as the secret value. So let me say add secret, and now I can go ahead and push the commit with my updated CI pipeline and see if it's going to execute properly. Here's the workflow run for my client CI pipeline, and we forgot to update the name, but it doesn't matter so much. Let's go into the individual steps and see what's going on inside. You can see that the build step completed. We're currently installing the static web app CLI, and this should also complete promptly. And then we're going to see if our deployment step is going to complete successfully. Now in my testing, I did find that this is a bit flaky, and it sometimes tends to fail for no obvious reason, and in that case the best option is to just retry the pipeline. Now let's see if the deployment is going to succeed on the first try. And after a few moments you can see that the deployment has completed, and I can navigate to my website. So if I click this link, I'll be navigated to the website where the data seems to be loading because my API is already running behind the scenes, but this also confirms that the environment variable for our API seems to be properly set because I'm getting responses back from the API and I'm able to load the data inside of the client application. So this takes care of our client CI pipeline, and we've automated our deployments, and every time we push a new change, it's going to automatically deploy it to Azure Static Web Apps. Now let's also tackle the REST API deployment pipeline. While I'm still in the client CI pipeline, I'm going to update the name of this step to be build and deploy, and now let me close this down, and let's focus on the backend pipeline. So I'm going to update it to also be build and deploy, but this time the API. Now let's update the name of the pipeline to be API CI. Now I'm going to update the environment variables and introduce a couple of new ones. First, there is the Azure Web App name, which is the name of our Azure App Service where we are hosting the API. Then I'm going to set an Azure Web App package path, and this is going to point to the output directory where I'm going to publish my DevHabit API project. The .NET version remains the same. I'm setting the working directory, solution path, API project path, and publish directory to simplify my existing code. And I'm also introducing a connection strings database environment variable, and this will be used by the migration bundles, and I'm going to introduce as an additional step as part of this pipeline. So as part of the continuous integration, I want to show you how to build and test the API project, how to generate a publish artifact. Then we are going to create migration bundles using EF Core and apply any migrations to our production database. And finally, if all of these steps succeed, then we're going to proceed to deploy a new version of our application. So I'm going to update the build step that we have here with a new one, and let me walk you through these steps. The first job that we're going to run is going to be build and test. And as you may already guess, this is going to build and test my application, but it's also going to publish it and upload the publish artifact. I'm using the environment variables to specify everything, including the working directory, the .NET version, the solution path, and our steps are basically restoring the solution, the same as we had before, running .NET build to build a project, running .NET test to run our unit tests, integration tests, and functional tests, which are also going to be using Docker thanks to test containers. Then I'm going to run the publish step, and this time I updated to only publish the API project. I also set the output represented by this publish directory, and it's going to target my publish directory environment variable. Now if I go back to the definition, this is just going to be publish, and the complete path from the root of our project is going to be devhabit API, and then publish, which is going to target the actual publish directory. This is defined inside of this environment variable, which I'm going to upload as an artifact using the GitHub action for uploading artifacts. And I'll give this the name of web app. Then I'm going to define my next job, which is going to apply my database migrations. The name of the job is apply database migrations, and I'm specifying that it depends on the build and test job to complete successfully. As far as the steps inside of this job, the interesting parts are installing the .NET EF tooling. I'm going to then use this to create my migration bundles, and if you're not familiar with this, I'll leave some documentation links right under this video, but this is going to produce a binary executable file that we can run to execute our migrations. I'm explicitly setting the startup project, the project that we should use to apply our migrations to. I'm specifying the database context to use, and the name of the bundle is going to be generated from the respective command. So this is going to produce 2 migration bundles, and I'm going to run them by simply executing the bundle. And I can also specify a connection string, which I'm going to pull from the secrets that we have available inside of the GitHub Actions. And finally, we can introduce our last step, which is going to deploy our application to Azure. I'm going to call this the deploy job. It's going to depend on both the build and test job, as well as the apply migration job. And what this is going to do is it's going to use the download artifact action to download the web app artifact that we have uploaded in the first step. And then it's just going to run the web apps deploy action, specify the web application name, specify the publish profile, which is going to be another secret value, and as the package value is going to target the artifact that we're going to download in the previous step. So this is going to